Imagine this: you're standing at the edge of a cliff. The wind is howling, the ground beneath your feet feels unstable, and the drop below is dizzying. You know you need to step back, but something holds you there. Not curiosity, not courage, but an invisible force that feels almost primal. It's not the fear of falling that paralyzes you. It's the fear of what lies beyond the cliff, the unknown, the possibility of failure, of judgment, of losing everything you've built. And so, you stay frozen, unable to move forward or backward, trapped in a limbo of your own making. Now, imagine this isn't a cliff at all. It's your life. Every decision you've ever made or avoided has been shaped by the same force. It whispers in your ear when you hesitate to speak your truth, when you stay in a job that drains your soul, when you choose comfort over growth. It's the reason you second-guess yourself, the reason you stay small, the reason you feel stuck. This force isn't just fear. It's the architect of your reality, the silent puppeteer pulling the strings of your choices. But here's the paradox. Fear isn't always the enemy. It's not just the thing that holds you back. It's also the thing that keeps you alive. Fear of danger keeps you from stepping into traffic. Fear of rejection keeps you from saying something hurtful. Fear of failure keeps you from taking reckless risks. And yet, this same fear, this primal, instinctive force, can also become a prison, can trap you in a life that feels safe but empty, predictable but devoid of meaning. So what is fear really? Is it a protector or a jailer? A guide or a tyrant? And why does it have so much power over us? Think about the last time you made a decision. Was it truly yours? Or was it shaped by the fear of what others might think, the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown? We like to believe we're rational beings, that our choices are the result of careful thought and deliberate intention. But what if the truth is far more unsettling? What if most of our decisions aren't made by us at all, but by the fears we've buried so deep we don't even recognize them anymore? Consider this: every time you choose the familiar over the unfamiliar, the safe over the risky, the comfortable over the challenging, you're not making a choice. You're surrendering to fear. And yet, we rarely see it that way. We tell ourselves we're being practical, responsible, realistic. We convince ourselves that fear is just a voice of reason, a necessary check on our impulses. But what if that's the greatest lie fear tells us? What if fear isn't protecting us at all, but keeping us from becoming who we're meant to be? This is the great question at the heart of our existence. How much of your life is truly yours? How much of it has been dictated by fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown? And what would happen if you stopped listening to it? The answer isn't simple. Fear isn't something you can just ignore or overcome with sheer willpower. It's woven into the fabric of your being, a survival mechanism honed over millions of years of evolution. It's the reason your ancestors survived predators, natural disasters, and the harsh realities of a world that didn't care if they lived or died. But here's the catch. The world has changed. The dangers we face today aren't lions or avalanches. They're subtler, more insidious. They're the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of not being enough. And yet, our brains haven't caught up. They still react to these modern fears as if they were life or death threats, triggering the same fight or flight response that kept our ancestors alive. This is the hidden tragedy of modern life. We're still running from lions, but the lions are in our minds. And so, we stay small. We stay safe. We stay stuck. We tell ourselves it's better this way, that we're avoiding pain, avoiding risk, avoiding failure. But what if the real failure isn't in falling? What if the real failure is in never jumping at all? This is the tension we must confront. This is the weight we must carry. Because the truth is, fear isn't just something we feel. It's something we are. It's the shadow that follows us everywhere, the voice that whispers in our ear, the force that shapes our reality. And until we understand it, until we confront it, we will never truly be free. But here's the thing: freedom isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to move forward in spite of it. It's the courage to stand at the edge of the cliff, to feel the wind and the instability and the dizzying drop below, and to take the step anyway. So, the question isn't how to eliminate fear. The question is, how do we stop letting it control us? This is where the journey begins. Not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. Because the moment you start to see fear for what it really is, not as a protector, but as a puppeteer, is the moment you begin to take back control. And that's when everything changes. To understand how fear controls our decisions, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth. Fear is not just an emotion. It's a system, a deeply ingrained evolutionary mechanism that has shaped human behavior for millennia. But somewhere along the way, this system, once designed to protect us, began to work against us. To see how, we must delve into the psychological and philosophical roots of fear, tracing its influence from the primal mind to the modern world. Let's start with the brain. Deep within the folds of your cerebral cortex lies the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure often referred to as the brain's fear center. When you perceive a threat, whether it's a snake in the grass or a critical comment from a coworker, the amygdala springs into action. It triggers a cascade of physiological responses. Your heart races, your muscles tense, your breath quickens. This is the fight-or-flight response, a survival mechanism that has kept humans alive for thousands of years. But here's the problem. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between physical threats and psychological ones. To your brain, the fear of public speaking can feel just as life-threatening as the fear of a predator. And because the amygdala operates faster than your conscious mind, it often hijacks your decision-making process before you even realize what's happening. This is why, when faced with a difficult choice, you might feel paralyzed, overwhelmed, or compelled to take the safe option, even when you know it's not the right one. This neurological wiring is only part of the story. To fully grasp the power of fear, we must also examine its psychological dimensions. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, offered a profound insight into this realm with his concept of the shadow. The shadow, according to Jung, is the part of ourselves we repress, deny, or hide, the aspects of our personality that we deem unacceptable or threatening. And what drives this repression? Fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of confronting the darker parts of our nature. Jung believed that until we integrate our shadow, until we face the parts of ourselves we're afraid to see, we will remain trapped in patterns of self-sabotage and unconscious behavior. In other words, the fears we refuse to confront don't disappear. They go underground, influencing our decisions in ways we don't even realize. This is why so many of us feel stuck, repeating the same mistakes, making the same choices, even when we know they don't serve us. But the roots of fear run even deeper than psychology. They extend into the realm of philosophy, where thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre have grappled with its existential implications. Nietzsche famously declared, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," a statement that challenges us to confront our fears head-on. Yet, he also recognized the seductive power of fear, how it can lure us into a life of comfort and conformity. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche warns of the last man, a figure who prioritizes safety and security above all else, sacrificing growth, creativity, and meaning in the process. Sartre, on the other hand, saw fear as a byproduct of our radical freedom. In Being and Nothingness, he argues that humans are condemned to be free, that we alone are responsible for our choices and their consequences. This freedom, Sartre suggests, is terrifying. It's easier to let fear dictate our decisions than to face the weight of our own autonomy. And so, we create what Sartre calls bad faith, a form of self-deception in which we deny our freedom and blame external forces for our choices. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of fear is how it's amplified by modern society. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World Revisited, warned of a culture that uses fear as a tool of control. Today, we see this in the constant barrage of news, social media, and advertising, all of which exploit our fears to manipulate our behavior. Fear of missing out, fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind. These manufactured fears keep us anxious, distracted, and compliant, diverting our attention from the deeper questions of meaning and purpose. And then there's the role of trauma. Gabor Mate, a renowned physician and expert on addiction, argues that much of our behavior is driven by unresolved trauma, painful experiences from our past that continue to shape our present. Trauma, Mate explains, creates a heightened state of fear, leaving us hypervigilant and prone to self-protective behaviors. These behaviors, while once necessary for survival, can become maladaptive, trapping us in cycles of avoidance and self-sabotage. So what does all this mean? It means that fear is not just a feeling. It's a complex interplay of biology, psychology, philosophy, and culture. It's a force that shapes our identity, our relationships, and our society. And yet, for all its power, fear remains largely invisible. We don't see how it influences our decisions, how it limits our potential, how it keeps us from living fully. This is the hidden problem. Fear doesn't just control our decisions, it controls who we become. But here's the twist. Fear is not invincible. It thrives in the shadows, in the parts of ourselves we refuse to examine. And that means the key to breaking free lies in bringing those shadows into the light. This is where the journey begins to deepen. Because once you understand the roots of fear, you can start to see its patterns. You can start to recognize the ways it shapes your choices, your relationships, your life. And that recognition is the first step toward reclaiming your power. But before we can talk about breaking free, we must first confront the consequences of living in fear. Because the cost of letting fear control us is far greater than we realize. The unseen consequences. If fear were merely an occasional inconvenience, a fleeting emotion that comes and goes, it would be easy to dismiss. But fear is not fleeting. It's pervasive. It seeps into every corner of our lives, shaping our decisions in ways we rarely notice. And the consequences of this invisible influence are profound, both for individuals and for society as a whole. Let's start with the personal. Imagine a life governed by fear. Not the dramatic, life or death kind of fear, but the quiet, insidious kind. The fear of failure that keeps you from pursuing your dreams. The fear of rejection that stops you from speaking your truth. The fear of uncertainty that traps you in a job, a relationship, or a routine that no longer serves you. These fears don't just limit your choices. They limit your potential. They keep you from becoming who you're meant to be. And the cost of this self-limitation is staggering. Studies have shown that fear of failure is one of the primary reasons people abandon their goals. It's not lack of talent or opportunity that holds them back. It's fear. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of what others might think. And so they settle. They stay in jobs that drain their energy, relationships that stifle their growth, and lives that feel smaller than they know they could be. But the consequences go even deeper. Fear doesn't just limit our potential. It distorts our perception of reality. Cognitive biases, such as the negativity bias, ensure that we pay more attention to threats than to opportunities. This bias, rooted in our evolutionary past, served a crucial purpose when survival depended on avoiding danger. But in the modern world, it often leads to a skewed view of reality, where risks loom larger than they actually are and possibilities seem smaller than they truly are. This distorted perception has a ripple effect. It influences not only our decisions, but also our emotions. Fear breeds anxiety, a state of constant unease that can erode mental health over time. Anxiety, in turn, can lead to avoidance behaviors, creating a vicious cycle where fear begets more fear. And the longer this cycle continues, the harder it becomes to break free. But the consequences of fear aren't limited to individuals. They extend to society as a whole. Consider the role. And then there's the impact of fear on relationships. Fear of vulnerability, for example, can prevent us from forming deep, meaningful connections with others. We build walls to protect ourselves, but those walls also keep us isolated. Fear of conflict can lead to passive-aggressive behavior, resentment, and ultimately the breakdown of relationships. And fear of abandonment can drive us to cling to unhealthy dynamics, sacrificing our own needs in the process. But perhaps the most insidious consequence of fear is its effect on creativity and innovation. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of stepping outside the norm. These fears stifle creativity, discouraging us from taking risks and exploring new ideas. And in a world that desperately needs innovation to address complex challenges, this is a cost we can ill afford. Even our physical health is not immune to the effects of fear. Chronic stress, often driven by fear, has been linked to a host of health problems, including heart disease, weakened immune function, and mental health disorders. Fear, in other words, doesn't just shape our decisions, it shapes our bodies. And yet, despite all these consequences, fear remains largely invisible. We don't see how it influences our choices, how it limits our potential, how it shapes our world. We tell ourselves we're being practical, responsible, realistic, but the truth is we're being controlled by a force we don't fully understand. This is the tragedy of fear. It convinces us that we're protecting ourselves, when in reality we're imprisoning ourselves. It tells us to play it safe, to stay small, to avoid risk. But in doing so, it robs us of the very things that make life worth living: growth, connection, meaning. So what's the alternative? How do we break free from this invisible prison? The answer lies in understanding fear not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a teacher to be understood. Fear, after all, is not inherently bad. It's a signal, a warning, a call to pay attention. The problem arises when we let that signal dictate our decisions, when we allow fear to become the sole arbiter of our choices. To break free, we must learn to listen to fear without being ruled by it. We must learn to distinguish between the fears that protect us and the fears that limit us. And we must learn to move forward in spite of fear, to take risks, to embrace uncertainty, to step into the unknown. This is not easy. It requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather avoid. But the rewards are immense, because when we stop letting fear control us, we reclaim our power, we reclaim our lives, and that's when the real journey begins. The rebellion, how to break free. Breaking free from the grip of fear is not a single act of defiance. It's a rebellion, a quiet, persistent uprising against the invisible forces that have shaped your decisions, your identity, your life. It's a journey that requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront the parts of yourself you've been too afraid to face. But it's also a journey that holds the promise of liberation, of reclaiming your power, of becoming who you're truly meant to be. So, how do you begin this rebellion? The first step is to recognize fear for what it is, not a truth, but a signal. Fear is not a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of your perception of reality. It's your brain's way of trying to protect you, but it doesn't always get it right. Just because you feel fear doesn't mean the threat is real. And just because the threat feels real doesn't mean you have to obey it. This is where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness, the practice of observing your thoughts and emotions without judgment, allows you to create space between yourself and your fears. Instead of reacting automatically, you can pause, breathe, and ask yourself, is this fear serving me? Is it protecting me, or is it holding me back? By bringing awareness to your fears, you begin to strip them of their power. But awareness alone is not enough. To truly break free, you must also confront your fears. This doesn't mean recklessly charging into danger. It means facing the fears that have been controlling you from the shadows. It means asking yourself the hard questions. What am I really afraid of? What's the worst that could happen? And if the worst did happen, could I handle it? Often, when we shine a light on our fears, we find that they're not as powerful as we thought. The fear of failure, for example, loses its grip when we realize that failure is not the end, it's a stepping stone. The fear of rejection becomes less daunting when we understand that rejection says more about the other person than it does about us. And the fear of the unknown becomes less paralyzing when we recognize that uncertainty is not a threat, but an opportunity for growth. This is where the work of Carl Jung becomes invaluable. Jung believed that the key to personal transformation lies in integrating our shadow, the parts of ourselves we've repressed or denied. By facing our fears, we begin to reclaim these lost parts of ourselves, unlocking a deeper sense of wholeness and authenticity. This process, known as shadow work, is not easy. It requires honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to sit with discomfort, but the rewards are profound. Another powerful tool in the rebellion against fear is reframing. Reframing is the practice of shifting your perspective, of seeing a situation in a new light. Instead of viewing fear as an enemy, you can see it as a teacher. Instead of seeing failure as a catastrophe, you can see it as a lesson. Instead of seeing uncertainty as a threat, you can see it as a canvas for possibility. This shift in perspective is not just philosophical, it's neurological. When you reframe fear, you activate different neural pathways in your brain, weakening the old patterns of fear and strengthening new patterns of courage and resilience. Over time, this rewiring can transform the way you experience fear, turning it from a paralyzing force into a source of empowerment. But perhaps the most radical act of rebellion is to embrace fear as a necessary part of growth. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." Fear, in this sense, is not something to be avoided or conquered. It's something to be embraced. It's the chaos that precedes transformation, the discomfort that signals growth, the uncertainty that makes life meaningful. This doesn't mean you have to like fear. It doesn't mean you have to seek it out, but it does mean you can learn to move through it, to use it as fuel rather than an obstacle. And when you do, you'll find that fear no longer controls you, it empowers you. Of course, breaking free from fear is not a one-time event. It's a practice, a way of being in the world. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to stumble and get back up again. But with each step, each act of courage, you chip away at the walls fear has built around you. And slowly, inevitably, you begin to reclaim your life. But the journey doesn't end here. Because once you've broken free from fear, you're faced with a new question. What will you do with your freedom? The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Here is the ultimate truth about fear. It will never leave you. It is woven into the fabric of your being, a primal force as old as life itself. But this truth is not a defeat, it is a revelation. Because the moment you stop trying to eliminate fear, the moment you stop seeing it as an enemy, is the moment you discover its true purpose. Fear is not here to control you. It is here to guide you. Think of fear as a compass, pointing you toward the edges of your comfort zone, the boundaries of your potential. It is not a wall meant to keep you trapped. It is a doorway, inviting you to step into the unknown. And the unknown, though terrifying, is where life truly begins. This is the paradox of fear. It is both the thing that holds you back and the thing that propels you forward. It is the shadow that follows you everywhere, but it is also the light that reveals your path. Without fear, there would be no courage. Without risk, there would be no reward. Without uncertainty, there would be no discovery. So, the question is not how to eliminate fear. The question is how to live with it, how to move through it, how to use it as a tool rather than a trap. This is where Viktor Frankl's insight becomes invaluable. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that even in the most harrowing circumstances, humans have the power to choose their response. Fear may be inevitable, but how we respond to it is not. We can let it control us, or we can use it as a catalyst for growth. We can let it shrink our world, or we can let it expand our horizons. This choice is the essence of freedom. But freedom is not a destination, it is a practice. The final word belongs to you. This is the ultimate realization. Fear does not define you. It does not control you. It is a part of you, but it is not all of you. Beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, beneath the uncertainty, lies something far more powerful, your authentic self. The self that is not afraid to dream, to create, to love, to live. And when you connect with that self, when you align your choices with your deepest values and aspirations, fear loses its power. It becomes not a tyrant, but a teacher. Not a prison, but a path. So what will you do with this realization? Will you let fear continue to shape your life, or will you take the reins and shape it yourself? Will you stay in the safety of the known, or will you step into the vast, uncharted territory of your potential? The choice is yours. And here's the thing, you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to leap off the cliff in a single bound. You can start small. You can start today. You can start by asking yourself one simple question. What would I do if I weren't afraid? And then take one step, just one. Because the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and every step you take in spite of fear is a step toward freedom. This is the final, most powerful realization. Fear is not the end of the story. It is the beginning, and your story is just getting started.